avance inévitablement vers des problèmes profonds, en plus des problèmes moraux qui existent à brimer la liberté d'expression et en particulier des journalistes. Merci beaucoup.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, we are blessed to live in a country with freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Debates in this very chamber often swirl around the sacredness of those values and what we must do to protect them. People who serve in uniform commit their lives to defend those values. I know this well as the son of a father who ended up as a prisoner of war, committed to those freedoms. History suggests that the people of Iran share Canadians' high regard for democracy. Cyrus the Great was one of the first lawgivers of ancient times, a king who liberated the Jewish people from captivity under the Babylonians. In the early 1950s, Prime Minister Mossadegh led a democratically elected government at a time and in a region where the right to elect one's leaders was fragile at best. Mr. Speaker, as the first ever government liaison to the Canadian Iranian people, I have come to appreciate contributions of people of Iranian background to the cultural fabric of our Canada. People like Davoud Ghavami, president of the Iranian-Canadian Congress, who has worked so hard to introduce Persian culture here in Canada. People of Iranian background appreciate hard work, good education, art, music, and close families. Women of Iranian background in Canada have demonstrated great leadership. I think of Nasreen Filsouf, head of the Canadian-Iranian Foundation, and the human rights advocate Nazanin Afshinjam McKay, for instance. There is tension today between the governments of Canada and Iran, tension that is at odds when judged against the natural affinity between the people of the two countries. Canada rightly holds the Iranian regime to account for breaching international nuclear proliferation guidelines, for supporting terrorist organizations, for destabilizing the region, and for human rights abuses against its own people. Tonight, it is Iran's human rights record that is the main subject of our deliberation in this great chamber. Mr. Speaker, despite President Rouhani's diplomatic engagement and the ongoing nuclear negotiations, there has been no indication of any transformative shift in Iran's policies and activities. The President and members of his administration continue to make public statements inside Iran and to international audiences in support of rights and freedoms. However, there's been no evidence of improvements, and the state continues to undertake serious and systemic human rights abuses. As Canadians, we believe Iran should be judged by its actions, not by its words. The Iranian regime continues to flout due process and the rule of law and seriously restrict freedom of expression, assembly, and association, consistently attacking human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, and bloggers. Mr. Speaker, I thank the many colleagues in this chamber tonight, colleagues of all parties with whom we stand together, and we stand against those abuses against the oppressed people of Iran. I'd like to make special mention of my colleague, the member for Westmount, who has been a driving force in recognizing Accountability Week. He and others have pointed out that the death penalty is used frequently in Iran. In a 3-day period last month, 43 people were executed. Persecution of the Baha'i people in Iran, a religious minority, has got worse and worse. We know of over 900 political prisoners in Iranian jails, which means there are probably many more. To be perfectly blunt, the situation of human rights in Iran has not improved since the election of President Rouhani in June 2013 and has shown clear signs of deterioration on several fronts. The discussion of liberties can be very theoretical, so it's important to bring it down to ground level. To speak of 900 prisoners makes our minds reel and stretches our imaginations. So the genius of Iran Accountability Week is that each of us participating parliamentarians pairs up with one Iranian political prisoner to highlight that person's plight and to personalize the situation better for the world to see. Il est toujours difficile de passer de la théorie à la pratique quand il s'agit des droits de la personne. Il est trop facile pour nous, ici au Canada, qui vivons en liberté et égalité, d'oublier la souffrance des gens qui vivent l'oppression d'une dictature. Pour éviter une discussion trop théorique, je vous propose donc de vous mettre à la place de quelqu'un qui est mis en prison pour ses convictions politiques. Based on information provided to me by Ms. Afshinjam McKay, I'm going to share the story of Banam Embra Mizadeh, who was imprisoned for 5 years for being a workers' rights activist, as well as defending children and human rights in Iran. As Banam's family recounts, this Nowruz, or Persian New Year, was the 5th for the family without Ibrahim by their side. He is in Ward 2 of Rajai Shah prison, known as Al-Quran prison. Originally, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but after a huge public outcry, his sentence was reduced. However, as his sentence was coming to a close, Judge Salavati from Branch 15 of Tehran's Revolutionary Court resentenced him to 9 years and 4 months on brand new charges of colluding with the People's Mujahideen, a banned opposition group, and spreading propaganda against the regime by contacting Mr. Ahmad Shahid, UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. Banam categorically denies any and all connections with the Mujahideen, but it's impossible to prove the negative absolutely. Although he's not a murderer or a thief, he's housed alongside dangerous common criminals in his ward, and as a result, his safety is threatened regularly. He suffers from arthritis in his neck, and further, due to the continuous pressure put on him inside prison and long periods of solitary confinement, he suffers from intestinal and kidney bleeding, for which he's denied medical help by prison authorities. He's denied even a painkiller. Sadly, his only child, Nima, is suffering from leukemia. Banam is denied any visitation with the family and his child. His family thanks the peace-loving human rights advocates in Canada, Iran, and around the world for our support. Together, we believe that continued pressure on the Iranian authorities increases the likelihood of the release of Banam and many like him. It's our duty to inform the public and human rights bodies about his imprisonment and torture for simply defending workers, children, and human rights. Monsieur le Président, au Canada, nos héros sont parmi d'autres joueurs d'hockey, musiciens et leaders de la société civile. Pour les Iraniens, on dénombre parmi les héros nationaux un grand nombre de poètes comme Hafez, Sadi, Rumi et Omar Khayyam. Je suis un grand partisan de Sadi qui a vécu au XIIIe siècle et dont les mots sont inscrits sur un mur de l'édifice des Nations Unies à New York. Le poème s'appelle Bani Adam, les fils d'Adam. Il parle de l'unité qui existe entre les hommes et les femmes du monde entier. Il dit que si une personne souffre, toute l'humanité souffre avec elle. Sadi's poem, famous among Persian people, relates so poignantly to why we are here today. As he put it, and I quote, "The children of Adam are limbs to each other, having been created of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, the other members uneasy remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the title human you cannot claim." Mr. Speaker, these are strong words, and they communicate a universal truth of our moral responsibility to champion the cause of those who suffer, as we now champion those in prison in Iran. Given that we know of hundreds of political prisoners there, we can assume there are many more about whom we do not know, and others living daily in fear for their freedom and their very lives. Sadi points out the significance of even one political prisoner. In my case, I've chosen Banam, suggesting that he represents all those who suffer in oppression in Iran and elsewhere. My colleagues in this House tonight, and my friends who fight for freedom in Iran and elsewhere, we can all agree with this sentiment. We ask you, President Rouhani and other members of the Iranian government, let Banam and other prisoners of conscience free. Sadi would cheer us on. And Mr. Speaker, in my role as a government liaison to the Canadian Iranian community, I've come to love the Persian poets. And I've written a poem each Nowruz, and one specially for this evening. It's called A Poem for a Prisoner. 800 years ago, the poet Sadi said it best. He said that feeling others' pain can oddly make us blessed. He sensed that in our souls a link unites us all as one, that we are all one family beneath a common sun. Sadi's words in Bani Adam reach us all today, people here in Canada, people far away. It's a foreign government whose abuses we despise. Those who suffer its abuse are brothers in our eyes. Canada seeks justice and will shout it from the heights. Our government opposes those who menace human rights. But while we challenge tyranny wherever it may reign, we sing with Sadi soulfully his powerful refrain. It's a bully government that we summon to account. It's not a quarrel with Irani citizens we mount. Our quarrel with the foe relates to government, it's clear. Our bond with Persian people is healthy and sincere. Mossadegh Cyrus stood for freedom at the base. Iran will learn to smile again, extend Azadi's face. Oppose the government we will, but Sadi said it best. We share with Persians Eshka, uniting East and West. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député d'Hochelaga.
Oui, ce que j'entends, c'est que le gouvernement conservateur parle des droits de la personne en Iran. Il se dit beaucoup de choses, mais j'aimerais savoir, est-ce qu'il y a des efforts réels qui sont faits de la part du gouvernement pour s'assurer que les droits de la personne en Iran progressent vraiment? Donc, il y a des efforts concrets en plus des paroles.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Merci bien pour les questions et je pense que nous sommes tous ensemble ce soir qui cherchent les mesures concrètes, pas seulement les paroles. Et il y a le soutien pour le programme qui est fait par l'Université de Toronto, l'Institut Monk, qui soutient un programme de radio qui est fourni pour les citoyens iraniens. Il y a aussi plusieurs efforts par notre ministre des Affaires étrangères dans les États-Unis, dans les Nations unies et les autres organismes internationaux. Nous sommes constamment les amis des gens qui souffrent l'oppression d'Iran et les gens d'Iran savent qu'ils peuvent compter sur le gouvernement canadien.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, and Kapuskasing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate the member taking the time to share a poem with us. It's not something that we see in this House too often, so thank you very much. I can tell you, certainly, the member will agree that Canadians always stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Iran in their aspirations for freedom, peace, democracy, and the rule of just law. And it's something that we stand, whether it's in Iran or anywhere else. That is the type of people we are. We will continue to stand with them and speak out when their voices are unfairly silenced. And actually, New Democrats actually believe that Canada has an important diplomatic role to play in bringing Iran back into the mainstream international community. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, I'm in agreement that, you know, in this House, there was all-party recognition of Iran's human rights abuses and other issues that require long-term diplomatic solutions by the international community. But what bothers us is rather than strengthening our diplomatic presence, we've seen where the government is actually cutting resources. So I'm just wondering how the member thinks that we can address long-term challenges such as this one here without necessary resources. Maybe he can explain to us what this government is prepared to do to try to help in situations such as this. We know that we have great organizations on the ground who are trying to address the human rights issue and trying to guide us while this is happening. But maybe he can talk about that. He can also talk about the verification process that needs to happen and what this government is going to do about the verification process when it comes to the proliferation of nuclear weapons.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
The questions are very intelligent ones raised by my colleague, and I thank you for them. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the answer lies partly in the role of Canadians of Iranian background here in Canada who can educate us concerning the best things that we can do. We have people like Davoud Ghavami, the head of the Iranian-Canadian Congress, Nazreen Filsouf, the Canadian-Iranian Foundation, who do their best to bring about a level of understanding here. And our government, when it appointed me as the first ever government liaison to the Canadian-Iranian community, anticipated that I would play three roles, that I would be a voice for people of Iranian background here in Ottawa, that I would help communicate to that community what our government is trying to achieve. And thirdly, and this is perhaps most ironic given that I'm not of Iranian background, that I would promote Persian culture here, or at least help people of Iranian background do that here in Canada. And it's been an honor to do that for these 6 years. I believe that part of the answer also lies in the diplomatic relations between the countries. And this is obviously one of great sensitivity, as we have no embassies between our two governments. But I do call this day upon the government of Iran to appoint a protector in Canada, not a protector in the United States, because the people of Iranian background who need diplomatic services could benefit from that, and that would be something that the Iranian government could do. Finally, I would just like to say, I believe I share this with every member in this chamber, that we know there will be a day when there will be a Persian Spring, when Nowruz will come and the freeze will melt away, and Iran will become the bulwark of democracy in the Mideast. And so we must do everything we can to bring that day about, and bring it about soon.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his remarks. And to ask him a question is with respect to the journalists who are being imprisoned in Iran and the ongoing human rights violations. I'm wondering if he can comment on if he is aware of the efforts that are being made currently by the Canadian government to advance human rights, and what is Canada doing, as he is a representative of the government, what is Canada doing to bring out the more than 200 journalists who continue to be imprisoned in Iran, especially on the heels of World Press Freedom Day? I think it's important to talk about the freedom of journalists.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Yes, and thank you for the question. It is both serendipitous and ironic that we are on the eve of World Press Freedom Day, and so many journalists are imprisoned in Iran, bloggers, people who merely desire to express their views in a free way. The government of Canada has been consistent, and in fact has led in the General Assembly of the United Nations year after year, calling for Iran to change direction and to pull away from its oppression. And we are known around the world for our leadership in this. Mr. Speaker, I think we all wish that there was more that we could do. What we are doing is also supporting the program run out of the Monk School, whereby we send messages to the people in Iran to encourage them, to give them some sense of what is really going on in the world, to make sure that people who desire freedom know that they do have friends in other parts of the world. And then thirdly, we're doing our best to support people of Iranian background here in Canada who desire freedom everywhere in the world. And they ultimately are leaders here in Canada who can raise us up the level of freedom, not only in Iran, but everywhere else. They know what oppression is like. They appreciate their freedom. And I'm so honored to call many of them my friends.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of National Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, for his continued advocacy on behalf of Iranians in Iran, those that have been politically imprisoned. As well, I know that he has a great love for the Persian culture. He often brings greetings during Nowruz, Persian New Year. And I also know that he is quite concerned about the human rights conditions and the destabilizing role that Iran plays in the Middle East and around the world. I'd like to hear his point of view on how he sees the hopeful discussions around the P5+1 in making sure that Iran doesn't achieve their nuclear ambitions. But more importantly, if he could talk to the point of some of the commentary that's been coming out of Tehran in the media that both President Rouhani and others, the negotiators from Iran that are in the P5+1, have essentially told the press there and the entire community that they haven't signed anything, and nor do they plan on bringing down more than 5% of the centrifuges that they have online today.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
It's been said there are many paths up a mountain, and there are many leaders and advocates in this House who promote freedom for people of Iran. And thank you to my colleague for that question, because you are certainly one of those. I'd first like to mention, Mr. Speaker, that it was a historic day when our Prime Minister attended a Nowruz event in this past year, the first time ever that a Canadian Prime Minister has formally attended the great celebration of Iranian Spring. A strong statement by our government on behalf of all Canadians that we stand with Canadians of Iranian background, and that we certainly stand against the oppression in Iran. Concerning the discussions that are going on that deal with stopping Iran from expanding its nuclear capacity, I can only hope that the P5+1 governments have the guts to sign a good agreement, but even more, that they have the guts not to sign a bad agreement. And that's where we have an international community to hope for restraint, to know that there will be inspections, and to know that the government that has flouted United Nations conventions on inspections concerning their nuclear program will adhere to those before any long-lasting agreement is signed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for New Westminster Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'll just